Welcome back to our Mindful Conversation live stream. I'm super excited to have in studio with me Melissa Campos,
Yep.
and she is with, and I'm gonna pronounce this and then I'm gonna spell it, Koselig Counselling.
That's right.
Okay, so when you're looking for her, it's not Koosh, Coosh or Koo. It's Koselig.
Correct.
And then many forms of counseling spelling. So pop that in and you'll get to Melissa, or you can contact us and we'll help you get to her. Okay, so Melissa, you are new-ish to the region. So you come to Kelowna in 2018 to pursue further education at UBC.
Correct.
And then fast forward to 2022, you've opened your practice.
That's right.
So maybe if you can fill in a bit of the backstory, that would be lovely.
Sure. So originally from Hamilton, Ontario, where I did an undergraduate degree in psychology, neuroscience, and behavior. So that really opened up my mind to learning about people and about our hardware, if you will, the brain and the body. And then I knew I wanted to become a therapist. And one way you can do that is having a master's in social work. And so I pursued a bachelor's of social work in Ontario as well, and then looked across Canada to see where would be a good place to do my master's. And here at UBCO, they have a clinical social work program.
Okay.
So I came out to Kelowna, did my degree, and then I originally thought I was going to give it 5 years before starting up in counseling, because I thought I should be out in the world and get experience. But then the pandemic happened, and that kind of shortened a few options as a new social worker or new graduate social worker. So I thought maybe this is the time to enter into therapy. And so it's been 4 years in total, but 2 years having a private practice.
But I mean, even with you, and I will say parachuting in that COVID time. I'm sorry. I think that's my phone. I'm so sorry. If you can just huck that outside the studio. Sorry. You parachute in a time that people are isolated and scared and not sure which way's left and right. And I found it interesting in reading your bio that you almost that Batman sign in the sky, and you come in to try and lean in and help.
Right. It was really rewarding to be able to support people at this wild time. And also challenging, because all my training leading up to that point was around in-person connection or being out in the community. And so then to be in the field of counseling at a time where my training basically had to be thrown out the window, and we had to be just as creative as our clients while supporting them through this really challenging time. So it was really amazing to see how resilient my clients could be and how they were finding different ways to manage their mental well-being, knowing that they were restricted in the things that they could offer.
So fast forward to today, you've been practicing under your business that you opened for 2 years. We're on the tail end of 2022. Can you share with the audience what on earth Koselig is and its origin?
For sure. So naming a business is a really tricky thing, as I'm sure a lot of business entrepreneurship folks out there can relate. And I would come up with ideas, Google it, and there'd be another practice that has it. And so when I saw the word Koselig, it's a Norwegian word, and even though I'm not Norwegian, what it speaks to is the idea of this well-being and contentment that comes from a combination of being out in nature, being with people, and being cozy. And so I just loved how that word described that feeling, because I really enjoy the feeling of being cozy and being out in nature and being with my community. And another reason I picked that word is because there's a researcher, his name is Dr. Mark Brackett, who talks about giving ourselves permission to feel our feelings. And he says that sometimes we don't have the language to describe our feelings, which can make it hard to know our internal landscape. And so he says that sometimes it's not our fault. It's sometimes we just, our language doesn't have it, the English language. And so it can be really helpful to pull from either different languages or different ways of describing, like describe your mood as if it was a color or the weather. And so I love how that word just brought together so many great things to emulate that.
An interesting part of branding or the naming protocol of our businesses, when it can be authentic and you give it time to breathe and inform you what it wants to be when it grows up, it shows up, it'll reveal itself. So it sounds like a perfect naming. So let's talk about perfectionism, and then let's circle back on some of the other areas of focus for you.
Sure.
So perfectionism, highs and lows. Where do you want to start?
Sure. So I can give a quick definition of how I understand perfectionism.
Okay.
So for me, it's this idea of striving towards an ideal and noticing that there's a difference between that with where things are currently. So it can mean striving to be an ideal version of yourself, having an ideal event, situation, and noticing that there's a gap between that. And so you want to strive and achieve that so you can have this ideal version, which brings to mind maybe more success for you, or maybe more happiness, or maybe something that will be beneficial for not just you, but for the people in your life who are counting on you, or the role that you have. So in general, it's this push towards wanting to succeed and achieve and excel.
So not negative.
And so my goal is to try and promote that it can be a good thing, because I think being told that you're a perfectionist can sometimes come with a bit of a negative connotation. Like maybe you try too hard, or you put a lot of unattainable standards, and those can be true. But I think it's such a gift as well to want to pursue and advance and be able to see that there's possibilities outside of where things are currently.
So, Melissa, may I share a vision that I have as it pertains to perfectionism, and allow you to layer in your thoughts on it?
100%.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
So again, not about me, but I want to sort of demonstrate something in action and not scripted.
Go for it.
So, right or wrong, and again, zero judgment here, folks. Right or wrong, I look, when I close my eyes and I set out to do something, I put a post in the ground way far away that I call perfection, or I call it, I call it perfection. So it is out there.
Yeah.
I know, or at least I think I know, that perfection doesn't exist. There is no perfect. But my philosophy or my theory is that if I started in the little town of 0 and I see the destination, I'm going to come to my next town that is like cool, and my next town that's almost there, and my next town of wow, awesome, incredible. And I know that I can't get perfection, but that's the direction that I want to point in.
Right. Yes. And I think this highlights how helpful it can be to have goals to work towards, because time is not a renewable resource. And so there's so many things you can do with your time that it's helpful to have avenues where you can focus your energy and attention. And so that is the benefit of putting a post somewhere where it's clear. However, sometimes we put that post way too far, and it can feel unattainable, and then you can feel like you are not enough because you haven't made it to that post, when maybe you have placed it somewhere where I don't know if anyone could at that point.
So true.
And I think
I can concur.
Yeah, and just to add that, I think your description also highlights the value of the journey along the way. Like even hearing you describe where it's like, cool, wow. Like it shows that there can be joy that comes from the pursuit, and that you don't have to just wait for the outcome or for the accolades, the external, to show you that you are doing things that are meaningful.
Fascinating. So I love sort of the seat you sit at as you maybe work with clients around perfectionism. It resonates with me, and the hope of this live stream is that people will be able to determine a match for themselves and you in their pursuit or their journey. So let's actually do a little bit more. Your areas, your 3 buckets, self-proclaimed, on your website that may or may not be. Well, let's just put them out there. So the 3 areas of focus are anxiety, burnout, and perfectionism. So we're talking today about perfectionism. Some of the practices that you have, and I recognized some of the work or the words, but I wondered if you could maybe explain them a little bit more to us.
Yeah.
So I can read cognitive behavior therapy, but what is cognitive behavior therapy?
Great question. So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is sometimes how it's the acronym for it. It basically looks at problems from a lens of the thoughts around that problem and the behavior, the actions, or the physiology of your body that lends itself towards that problem. So it's a twofold layer, with the third piece of your emotions and feelings. So typically from a cognitive behavioral lens, you're looking at things from what is the thoughts, what are the actions, and what are the feelings around this, because they can all influence one another.
And can we get in a pattern in those where it just keeps repeating?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all from the individual lens, because importantly, you might have really good thoughts and really good behaviors, and you might feel really good. But if your environment is one that doesn't promote those things, then it can be really challenging to still have a positive outlook, or to do the habits, or to feel good about yourself. And I think the pandemic is a really good example of that, where you might really have wanted to have hugged your friend or talked to your friend, but it was impacted the ways you had to do that because of our environment. So cognitive behavioral therapy is cognizant of knowing that there's things in the individual that we can control, but it can be influenced by the things around us that are commonly outside of our control, which as a perfectionist, you'd probably really hate hearing things outside of your control.
We do. We do.
Yes, guilty.
Emotional literacy and regulation. What is emotional literacy?
Yes. So I think there's more understanding around this concept, which is basically having language to describe our feelings and having the words for it. And so
we talked about this off air. Okay.
Yeah. And the important thing about that is, if you and I were trying to have this conversation right now without words, it would be really challenging to know what we're trying to say to each other. And so if you can picture that, where if you're going through something and you're struggling with how to describe that, then it can be really hard to know what tools and solutions you need if you're unable to even discuss it. Articulate.
Yeah.
Exactly that. So emotional literacy is helping people to put words to how they're feeling, or awareness to how they're feeling, because not everyone communicates the same way. So it might be through dance, it might be through music, it might be through art, it might be through photos, it might be through, images, that even that can be part of your emotional literacy to understand more of your internal landscape.
Fascinating. Mindfulness. We all hear having the right mindset or a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So is mindfulness that lane, or is it more being aware of individual triggers or patterns, or
I would say it's
how
more
complex is mindfulness?
I'd say it's pretty big. But I would say it's different from a fixed and growth mindset. Those describe the ways that we see our traits. So sometimes people will see their traits as being fixed from the start, which can be really demoralizing if you want to succeed. But if you have a fixed mindset, you might think, oh, I can't get better at this. This is as good as it's going to get.
I can't write.
I'll never be like that person over there. Versus a growth mindset says, maybe I can't today, but I can work towards it. I can build that skill set. And that's different from mindfulness, which I would describe it as this idea of globally being aware and present with the present moment. Without judgment is an important piece of that. So right now I can be mindful and aware that I'm feeling a little anxious right now in this situation. I'm feeling, but also calm in how our conversation is going, versus and I know we're going to enter into self-compassion, but as a little bit of a spoiler alert, a difference here is that if you then judge yourselves for those feelings, then that can lead to some challenges of being human and having feelings, but then judging yourself for going through the motions of something that I think a lot of people would experience.
And it takes, and actually I'm going to say this, but I'm more as a statement, but I'm looking to you for validation or verification. It takes a lot of practice to not practice judgment, mostly on ourselves, which is interesting that the next item on here is self-compassion, because darn, can we be mean?
Oh, absolutely. And there is a evolutionary reason for that, is because fear can be a very quick and strong motivator. However, in today's society where we don't have the same immediate harms to our life, at least in some areas of our world, we don't have to rely on that old software. We can update that software to include more kindness in how we talk to ourselves.
I love that.
Yeah, and a really great analogy is when you think about the teachers you had at school, who were the ones that you wanted to learn from? Did you want to learn from that scary teacher who was like strict and rigid and judgy? Or did you want to learn from that teacher who was kind and curious and allowed for questions and for things to be wrong to learn from? So if you can be that inner ally and cheerleader for yourself, then it just helps to motivate you towards the things that you want to do.
So let's take self-compassion now and bring it back to perfectionism in highs and lows.
Definitely.
How can we better be self-compassionate in that pursuit of perfectionism?
So self-compassion in general is the idea of being supportive and kind to yourself like you would to a good friend. And so if you think about, isn't that just sweet?
Isn't that something?
Just that in and of itself
Okay.
encapsulate a lot, I think, of when we're putting that post into the ground. There's a distance there between where you are at to where you want to be. And it can sometimes be a long road to that point. So if you can have that inner supporting, self-compassionate voice, it can help carry you through the parts where it feels like this is not working, or I'm failing, or I'm making mistakes, or you're doubting yourself. And so self-compassion can be that support to care for yourself in the hard times and also celebrate when things are going well towards that 100% or that achievement that you're looking for.
I find your example so literal and so moving, because I would suggest that we run to each other's aid. Oh, Melissa, that's not true. You're amazing. You do great things. And we're so quick, and it's so natural to support each other. But to learn how to do that for ourselves is a really important, I would say, crucial piece of work.
100%. Yes. And It speaks also to the power of mindfulness, of being present with your emotions, because I know when I'm going through a hard time, that's the last thing I want to do is sit in my uncomfortable feelings. But if you don't sit with it, chances are they're going to appear in some fashion. You know, in therapy, we talk about how feelings can be like an inflatable ball.
I love this one.
Where if you put it under the water, eventually it's going to find a way back up, and it might not come up the same way that it went in. And so with self-compassion, there's that importance of being mindful to how you're feeling, which, like you said, sometimes a good friend just wants to say, no, it's okay, it's going to be fine. And they're kind of moving you past that moment.
Yeah.
Which, on the one hand, can be helpful to pull you a little out of that darkness if you need a little bit more light. But at the same time, if you sit with it and are present with yourself, then it allows you to process that. So it doesn't just have this unnamed, unclaimed impact on you. And it allows you to like move forward with that in a kind way.
And I think it is critically important to have resolution in those feelings, because they sit there and they don't just sit there like in an empty room doing no harm. They do present themselves, and often in our health, in our physical health, and our mental health. Neuroscience. What is it?
So it's the study of the brain, and the reason I include it as part of my toolkit is for my psychology degree. And I think it helps understanding why we do things. When you look at the physiology and the parts of the brain that help us to get through our day-to-day. And so a common one for anxiety, for example, is talking about the threat system, like our fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And that just comes from our hardware of our brain is divided into different components, and they all work together, but they have different categories of things that they do that's more specialized, let's call it. And so when you're when you're in any situation, the way that your brain is structured is that information will come through your senses, go up your spine, into the brainstem. And because our brain develops from back to front, so our oldest systems are in the back of our head to our more frontal lobe advanced, it means that information typically goes to those older, like monkey brain aspects, the reptilian brain, the lizard brain sometimes. And so it's actually really helpful when you're about to step on the road, but a car is coming and you're reacting without even noticing, because your body got that information and it went to your amygdala, your emotion centers, and it told the rest of the body, move.
Yeah.
And it goes like 0.0000 seconds to that before it enters to your thinking parts to be like, okay, now I know what happened. And so coming from that perspective, I think it validates a lot of behaviors that people experience where they sometimes think, I don't know why my body is shaking. I don't know why I feel nervous. Like I know everything's fine. But it's just those old parts of us that are trying to keep us safe, acting first because they typically have priority in the sequence of information to help you survive, because that's what we are hardwired for, survival, not always happiness. And so there can sometimes be a conflict in that.
So, true or false, are you able to help individuals update their hardware?
Ooh. So I think I would say I can help them more so with their software, I would say.
Okay.
So the way that they use the parts that they have, because sometimes our hardware, so like our bodies and our brains, can be shaped by things from our childhood, can be shaped by things that are in our environment. And so I try to come from a place of, well, if we can be aware, mindful, then it can help you to choose differently the things you have under your control.
Well thought and well responded. Thank you for not quickly just accepting my hardware fix and bringing it back to something that you can have impact on the software. Developmental psychology.
So for the longest time, I thought I was going to be a therapist who works with children. And so I took a lot of training around how healthy development can look like and what happens when we don't have the things that we need for healthy development. And so I use that lens because nowadays I work with adults, and I use that lens to think about, well, what happened in childhood that may have influenced why you're so hard on yourself, why you have a fear of failure. Why is it that when you succeed, there isn't that internalized joy? It might be, or a common one with perfectionists, why do I struggle with taking rest and taking breaks? And so from a developmental psychology lens, we can look at, okay, well, what did rest and break look like for you as a kid? Was it modeled for you? Were you allowed to rest? What was the self-talk that was modeled or suggested as a child? And was there a priority of your external successes over your internal skill sets? And I know parents are doing the best with what they have. So I never come from a place of they did you wrong.
Fault or
it's more like, if you look at generations of your ancestors, you can see that probably their toolkits were not as wide as the toolkits that we have today. And so if you look back in time, you can see, if only they had known about emotional literacy and attachment in the way that we know now, if only they had
different. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that lens just helps me to provide, I think, more context and again, validation as to, well, I'm 33, I'm 45, I'm 77. Why haven't I figured it out yet? It's like, well, there might be things that have been ingrained from a young age that by understanding, we can see. A common analogy I'll just quickly add is that when we're born, sometimes it's like people are planting flowers into a garden of things that we need in this world.
Oh,
and
I'm
so
liking this. Yeah.
As you get older, when you talk to someone like myself, a therapist or a coach or someone who helps you be introspective and reflective, you can see, wait a second, who put that in my garden? I don't think I want to water that anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's the perspective of looking back to know what you want to take with you moving forward.
So I like that you have this, you had a path of child psychology, and when I was looking at your information, I did the puppy dog head tilt, where I went narrative therapy, inner child work, shadow work, and play therapy, and I now understand those layers coming into the practice, because it's the work that you maybe would have done with children, but we at 45, 77 still have a significant amount of childhood things, gardens that have planted that we maybe have to pull. Interesting. Mind-body connection.
So this kind of relates to the cognitive behavioral lens, where if you can look at one area like the brain or the way you think, chances are it'll have a trickle effect on the other parts. So if you change the way you think, you can probably change the way you act, and vice versa. If you change the way you act, it might shape the way you think. And so being cognizant of that mind-body connection is so powerful, because it means that you have, in psychology, we call it either a top-down approach or a bottom-up. So you can try to, exactly. You can, or even a combination of both. So you can try to get through a hard time or a hard situation by using the way you think about things. But if that's too busy, then you can try to regulate through what the body can do to help you calm or maybe give you some energy. And so even a quick example of if you're feeling nervous, you could do a workout, you could dance, because you're helping to get rid of some energy. And by releasing that energy, it can help the brain feel calm and allow you to be more available to think your way through the situation.
I'm seeing so much on TikTok and Instagram right now that shows the benefits of, again, modeling mom or grandma dancing with their littles, just awesome. Literally every day, just throwing something on Alexa and just boogieing. So I find those those comments fascinating. Okay, so last one.
Sure.
Looking at your family of origin and current family dynamics. So I find that interesting because that's rear view mirror origin and that modeling or garden planting or that thing that was done or not done, to really looking ahead. I'm in the driver's seat in my current family dynamic. So what does that work look like, or what is it? What does all that mean?
Yeah. So family of origin commonly looks at the family that you were born into, and thinking about how did that shape your development? How did that shape your perspective? And when you then bring that into the present, then you can see if you are still in contact with those individuals, or if you grew up in the foster care, or if you're adopted. It's a different experience too, about who from that time is here today, and how do those present interactions, or maybe lack of interactions, influence you in how you feel about yourself. So it's really helpful work, because you can even look at the way that culture, or the year that your parents were born, or the year that you were born, influences who you are today. And then you can, I have a lot of people that come into counseling and they're like, oh, I wish my parent number 1 or 2 would go into counseling too, because it'd be so great if they could learn these things. And so sometimes it's like an understanding of, now you have all this knowledge, and how different it might have been if they had that knowledge. And then you could even include boundary setting into this. If you're finding that, your caretakers may have helped you get through life to a certain degree, but maybe they're not healthy or helpful, or maybe they need some boundaries so that they can show up for you and love you in the way that feels good for you, while still having something in place so you can love them and be there for them without either side doing too much for the other, or needing more from one or the other. Yeah, so it's really cool stuff that just helps us to understand our mental well-being, not just as an individual, but recognizing that we are part of systems and communities, and seeing how that shapes us with our family in the past and who we associate as family today.
Melissa, you are a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. I've been able to hang out with you for maybe 25 minutes here.
Cool.
And it's just fascinating to me to see the different seats you sit in to look in, or to be able to coach or assist from. I think it's fascinating. So I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you. So it's at, now I'm going to say the name wrong again.
It's okay.
Koselig Counselling. So that's Koselig. Nothing like it sounds.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Counselling, COUNSELLING.com, and it's Melissa at, so website, and Melissa at for email address. Is there anything, Melissa, that I missed asking you that you'd like to share, or any words of wisdom or parting thoughts?
Sure. I'll just come back to self-compassion. So if you want to learn more, Dr. Kristen Neff is a huge resource in this. She's done a lot of research to talk about self-compassion. And a really easy exercise, if you want to start your self-compassion journey today, is known as the self-compassion break. And so basically what that is there's 3 elements to self-compassion. There's mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. And so mindfulness is first recognizing the emotions that you're having without over-identifying them. So it's saying, this is like a feeling of having some nerves, like this is feeling nervous, as opposed to, I'm a nervous wreck. This is going to be terrible. So it's just being present without judgment with how you're feeling.
Okay.
And then common humanity expands that into recognizing that in the large fabric of humanity, chances are someone has experienced something similar. If not the exact same thing, they have experienced similar emotions. And so it's recognizing that you're not alone in how you're feeling. Because sometimes people will say, especially my perfectionists, no one will understand how it feels to fail when I've achieved so much, or it looks like it's great on the outside, so who can I go to when things are not going well? But chances are all of us have had experience with failure, and definitely me. And so I can absolutely relate to that. And so it's being mindful, recognizing you're not alone, and then self-kindness is talking to yourself like you would a friend. And so a self-compassion break just brings all that together and saying, this is a moment of feeling nervous, but I'm sure a lot of people feel nervous when they're in a situation like this, talking to a crowd. And so what's a kind thing I can say to myself? Well, I gave this a try and it was brave, and Nikki's a very sweet person, and that made it a lot easier. And so I can just be really proud of myself for coming up and trying this today.
Very brave and courageous, and you did wonderful. I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much for spending the morning with us.
Thank you.